layout of the station, and I think you guys are probably getting familiar with this map, but I'll point it out again. Here's the Civic Center up here and the Metro Storm Drain, Blacktail Creek coming in. This is Montana, and this is the area called Lower Area 1. So I'm going to talk quite a bit. I'll go over SS4 and SS5 are going to turn out to be fairly important stations because they bracket where Buffalo Gulch and Metro Storm Drain come in. And of course SS7, the difference between SS6 and SS7, there's not much separation there, is what comes in between those two is Metro Sewer. I'd also point out, because I don't have it on here, is the outfall of both Montana Pole and the treatment lagoons. So the treated groundwater occurs between 6A and 6G. And that's, I mean, that's a clean water input. Next one. It's a little more complicated than just saying there's a numeric standard out there that you have to meet, because in this case, it's a hardness-based standard for cadmium, copper, and zinc. And that's the formula, and for cadmium or copper or zinc, you have different factors right here. But and you can see it's a logarithmic function. Next slide. When we go out and collect a sample, we collect, or we analyze two different fractions. One of them is the dissolved fraction of the metal, and that's just the metal ions. The other one is total recoverable, so it's ions plus particles that have metals attached to them. And those are usually fine particles. But the federal standard, and it's really what the state standard, numerically it's what the state standard is based on. All the work was done using dissolved metals. So it is really the basis for the standard. Dissolved is recognized as having a direct effect on aquatic life. The way they set the standard is they put some kind of organism in a tank and start adding copper until half of the population dies, and then they have a set point. And they're based on that, but it's based on dissolved. The state standard, DEQ7, is based on meeting the standard with the total recoverable fraction. And the reason that the state did that was that we wanted a way to at least be able to regulate something that has an effect, but it's an indirect effect. It comes up through the food chain into a trout through macroinvertebrates. And it's a real effect. It's just really hard to set an exact guideline on what's the amount that is harmful. So, next one. So in surface water, there's basically two situations we look at. We look at base flow water quality, and that's normal flows in the stream. So that's all year long, whether it's high or low flow. And the remedy is going to address problems in the stream during those periods by controlling groundwater inputs. It's been found that's the main problem during those times of the year. Stormwater quality is a different matter, and it is going to be managed by managing the stormwater before it gets to the stream. And it's a program called Best Management Practices. There's some tools we'll look at that have been laid out that we'll be using. Next slide. So base flow, if you say base flow to most geologists or hydrologists, they'll think it's different than what we're calling base flow here. Because it includes both low flow and high flow. So July through February, the stream's usually fairly low, and the only reason it's still flowing is from groundwater inputs. In the spring, starting in April through June, we're getting a lot of snow melt off the higher elevations. And so this is what this is the average mean daily flow. So for a 22 year period of record, every day is represented as the average of what happened on that day. And you can see here, starting in March, it starts to rise and comes up and comes back down in June. So this entire cycle is what we call base flow in this case. So for surface water, base flow, they need to capture and treat contaminated groundwater to prevent its discharge to Silver Bow Creek. And we use a slightly different standard. It's still that logarithmic function, but it comes out with a slightly different number than we use for stormwater. We use the chronic standard here. So in other words, it's a chronic standard because fish shouldn't be subjected to that level of, say, copper daily, day in, day out, day in, day out. So how have we been doing with this base flow? And I've showed you this slide before. I've got to point out a couple of things. This is a timeline. This is a timeline, and instead of plotting, this is for zinc. Instead of plotting zinc concentrations over here, I plotted the ratio between the concentration and the standard. And maybe that sounds difficult to pick up right away, but it's really simple. It just means that if the ratio is above 1, you're exceeding the standards. If it's below 1, you're in compliance. So here's the history. This was before they did the removal at LAO, the Colorado tailings and everything. This is during the removal. You can see they were releasing metals downstream to do the removal. And then you can see this general trend downward. We have a few bumps up and down. This one jump down here was when they took all of the water that they were capturing in lower area 1 and started running it all through the Butte treatment lagoons. We started to see an effect. This rise up here is where they started to rebuild the Metro storm drain. And again, they were dewatering and releasing water into the creek. But once that was done, and once MSD captured groundwater was all sent to the Butte treatment lagoons, we're meeting standards for zinc almost all the time. Next slide. Oh, okay, sorry. So here's copper, and copper is the most problematic metal for us. And so usually these presentations end up going with copper. Again, same scenario. Here's the removal. You can see a nice downward trend, but you don't see the rest of it. And it's kind of been bumping around here, right at the standard line, a little bit above, a little bit below. You'll notice that this runs out in 09. In 10 or 11, Craig, kind of a little of both. There was some additional removals and some additional groundwater capture in lower area 1. And I think this is going to, for dissolved, I know over 11, it's all, I think it's all down there. And there might be a couple of bumps up for total recoverable. Same scale. This is the, I call it the compliance ratio. So here's this is actually just averages from all of the 2009, 2010 data for each of the stations. So we're marching downstream in this case, starting all the way up at Harrison Avenue and ending up at SS07 at the end of BPSOU. So again, we have dissolved here, we have, and we have total recoverable up here. You can see there are still copper inputs all along the creek. But as long as this would be meeting standards, that's probably okay. You can see there's a bump up in both dissolved and total recoverable, and that's really due to the input of the sewage treatment plant. This little trend down there is probably dilution from both Montana Pole and the Butte treatment lagoons. Next slide. And this is, for a few years, ARCO contractors were collecting the effluent from the Metro sewer. And so here's the copper in that. And again, this is This is compliance. And you can see that their outfall is really never in compliance, both dissolved and total recoverable. So now, that's kind of a, and actually those are